For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another week of Rooted. This week we're focusing on one of the most celebrated fruits of the season, cherries. We've got a lot to get through in this one, so grab a snack, get comfy, and get ready to learn along with me. Cherries are members of the Rosaceae family, but specifically in the genus Prunus, with famous relatives like roses, strawberries, almonds, and plums. Interestingly, cherries are actually separated into 3 separate subtypes in botany because there are so many different varieties of them. So those 3 types are true cherries, bush cherries, and bird cherries. Of course, true cherries are the ones most of us are thinking of when we think of cherries. They're usually grown on trees, have smooth fruits without grooves, and their flowers tend to grow in bunches while they have a single growth point per axil, which means they only have one branch that comes out of every growth point, which gives them a very kind of clean looking canopy in shape. They're a little bit more organized than the bush type, which we're moving into right now. Bush cherries are obviously bushes, and they have much smaller fruits that typically grow in groups of 3 fruits. So those are your sand cherries, your rock cherries, those kinds of guys. You probably see them pop up a lot in landscaping where you want some seasonal interest in your shrubbery. And finally, we have bird cherries, which is kind of a catch-all category realistically. So it includes anything from a cherry laurel, choke cherries, and even black cherries all fall into this last catch-all bird cherry category. And we'll likely dig into a lot of these plants in some later episodes, but for today we're mostly going to focus on true cherries, specifically the ones with fruits we like to eat. So those are going to be our sweet cherries and also kind of sour cherries. So sweet cherries are native to kind of a broad range, anywhere from Europe, Western Asia, and in parts of North Africa, but have since been spread pretty much everywhere since we started cultivating them, which was as early as 72 BC, and that really kind of bent my brain. But apparently, they've been tasty for pretty much forever, unlike watermelon, so people started wanting to keep them around a lot earlier. Cherry trees tend to get anywhere from 6 to 40 feet tall, with a canopy anywhere from 5 to 25 feet, and the reason they have this range is because we've cultivated so many different kinds. So the ones that are 6 feet tall and have that 5-foot spread, that's typically going to be a dwarf cherry that we've bred specifically to be a little easier to manage. But like all cherries, they prefer well-draining soil with plenty of nutrients, and will need a pretty solid watering in order to support healthy fruit growth. They also need a period of cold to help the fruit set, which is usually about 800 hours of cooler temperatures. And as far as fruit goes, cherries tend to be sort of delicate and needy when it comes to care, but because they're so tasty, we all tend to just kind of look the other way. Outside of the cooler temps, they're also not self-fertile, and they need to be cross-pollinated, but lots of varieties actually can't cross-pollinate each other either, so you have to be kind of strategic when you're planting cherry trees. There are some varieties that we have bred to be self-fertile, but they tend to be a little bit harder to find, so you really have to do your research if you're planning on planting cherries. And sour cherries are kind of an exception to this, but they're smaller, and we usually only cook them because the reason they're called sour cherries is because they are super sour to just eat by themselves, but they're likely what you're buying when you buy pie filling, jam, any kind of cooked cherry product. And not only is it hard to get cherry trees to kind of put on fruit, but that fruit is pretty tricky to harvest since it's very small and pretty delicate as far as fruits go. Most of it is either harvested by hand, with the help of like a cherry picker in modern day farming to reach those really high up guys. Or they also have this nifty machine that literally shakes the tree and it scatters that fruit onto blankets or tarps that are placed underneath. This is also a common method for people harvesting almonds and olives. So if you've ever seen either of that, this method also works for picking cherries. If that wasn't tricky enough though, cherries are also kind of notorious for getting pests, mostly because they're very tasty. The worst thing that they're afflicted by, in my opinion, is called bacterial canker, which is an issue that causes necrosis in the tree. It can cause the bark to pull back and the leaves to develop holes, and it gives them, honestly, probably the nastiest looking scabs I have ever seen. They are disgusting. One summer when I was working at a nursery, I was usually the first person that customers would see, and I helped manage our phones. So I can't tell you how many unsolicited canker picks I've been subjected to. And when I close my eyes, I can still see them. And they are so gross. They are so nasty. But it turns out I'm not the only one who's haunted. In Japanese legends, there are many stories about trees who are inhabited by the spirits of samurais or other folks who died honorably in service to their country or to someone they loved. They are normally marked by abnormal blooms. And while those stories are really interesting, we'll actually be going over them in more detail in a special episode since they really deserve more time and focus than we can give them today. But fret not, we're still going to dig into some Japanese folklore. In one of my absolute favorite stories, Konohana Sakuya Hime, the goddess of cherry blossoms, Mount Fuji, and active volcanoes, gets caught in the middle of a sort of taming of the shrew situation. So basically, in this story, a man, Ninigi, who happens to be the son of a god, falls in love with our girl Sakuya Hime. And when he goes to ask for her hand in marriage, her father suggests that he marry her sister, Iwanaga Hime, who, true to her nature, basically had a heart of stone, since she was, in fact, the rock princess. Anyway, Ninigi was pretty upset about marrying the rock princess, and instead was kind of it's either Sakuya Hime or nothing. I'm in love with her, she's stunning, she's gonna be the perfect wife. And then he proceeded to be pretty rude about the whole marriage. So Igawa Nagahime, knowing her worth, was pretty upset by essentially being called ugly, and she was maybe a little extra spiteful. So she casually just cursed all of humanity to be as delicate and short-lived as her sister's blooming beauty, cursing us all to have short lives. And I guess I kind of get it, but at the same time, I'm could we have not just punished that one man? Sakuya Hime falls pregnant the first night they're married, but Ninigi doubts that it's his child, and instead assumes she tricked him into marrying her just to have help raising her child. So, to prove him wrong, Sakuya Hime decides to put it to a high-stakes test. She locks the baby in a house, sets it on fire, and explains that if the child lives, it's Ninigi's. And well, out from the ashes, a perfectly unscathed baby was pulled out. This later goes on to explain why, in many cultures, cherry blossoms and branches were used as a sort of protective symbol that would watch over expectant mothers and ensure they had a safe, smooth birth and healthy baby. Speaking of stories involving slight spite and babies, Mary and Joseph, of Christian fame, were walking through a cherry orchard when a super pregnant Mary asked Joseph to pick her some fruit. Clearly eager to prove he wasn't at all salty about his wife being chosen to birth the Messiah, he said maybe she should just ask the father of her child to pick them for her. Jesus, upon hearing Joseph's comment, asks the cherry tree to lower its branches so that Mary can pick her own goddamn cherries, leaving Joseph to stand on the orchard, mouth agape, like the scrub he was. This was literally such a slay moment for Mary and Jesus that in the 1960s, they actually wrote what would now be an absolute pop ballad, The Cherry Carol, about this exact incident. Meanwhile, in Scotland, the land was just a tad divided on cherries, with half of the land swearing that cherries, also sometimes called hagberries, belonged to the witches, and anyone who brought the wood into their home would be cursed for eternity and doomed to hell. On the other half, though, people believed that walking sticks made of cherry wood would prevent the user from getting lost in the mist, feeling the cherry was inherently helpful and healing. As a related fun fact, cherry wood is actually some of the best wood to make bagpipes, which probably helped folks on the witch side of things come back around to liking cherry wood. But one group who has never been accused of hating cherries? Magpies. These bad boys were at one time rumored to need at least 3 full meals of cherries before they would stop screaming, which honestly is so valid. But what would eating 3 full meals of cherries do to the human body? Well, in old times, cherry was often relied on as a way to treat chronic cough, to fight inflammation, and to help with general illness. As an added fun fact, this is why our cough medicine still tastes like cherry, since it was commonly added in cough syrups because it's sweet, and it helped to make some of the other herbal additives more palatable. Cherry was also effective in cough syrups because it has anti-inflammatory, expectorant, and sedative properties, all things we really want when our bodies are trying to fight any kind of sickness. As a key ingredient in the Sleepy Girl mocktail, cherries make us sleepy primarily because they increase our levels of melatonin because they contain tryptophan, an amino acid we use to naturally produce melatonin. And melatonin makes us feel tired because it regulates our circadian rhythm. About 2 hours before you typically start to fall asleep, the body starts making melatonin as a sort of signal to wind down. Outside of Sleepy Girl mocktails, cherries have also played a historically large role in cocktails and in poisons. As far as cocktails go, cherry was a key component in spirit making due to its use in barrels. Cherry barrels have medium-sized pores, which allows the liquor inside to permeate, taking on sweet notes of stonefruit. The wood is pretty expensive, though, making the liquor made in those barrels very desirable and pretty expensive. In, I guess we could say, alternative forms of spirit making, cherry pits can technically be used as a murder weapon, but not in the way you might expect. Like many members of the Prunus genus, cherry pits contain amygdalin, which releases hydrogen cyanide. Cyanide is toxic to us because it essentially puts our cells in a chokehold, slipping past our defenses and binding to our cells, causing them to basically shrivel up and die by preventing them from producing ATP. And for that reason, all forms of cyanide are technically considered blood agents. Hydrogen cyanide was first used as an agent of chemical warfare by the French in World War I, then by the Nazis in World War II in Zyklon B, which was initially developed as a pesticide to fight against the louse and flea population in concentration camps, but then they mixed it with diatomaceous earth and some other nasty stuff. Once they realized how effective it was against the insects, they unfortunately decided to start using it on people, killing over 1.1 million innocent victims. After that, we rightfully stopped using hydrogen cyanide in most other stuff. But plenty of other murders have been tied back to cyanide, as it takes very little to be effective, works pretty quickly, and can be awfully tricky to detect based on symptoms alone, which include general weakness, nausea, headache, and difficulty breathing. The good news here is that it's pretty uncommon to die from cyanide poison just by eating cherries. In fact, the only way that cherry pits can even hurt you is if you crush them up while you're eating. Swallowing a pit whole will do absolutely nothing to you. And that's great because obviously cherries are a super popular snack and commonly preserved to be put into our baked goods. Baked goods so tasty, in fact, that Henry VIII insisted cherries be introduced to England after he tasted them in Belgium. Outside of baked goods, jams, and other tasty snacks, cherry tree resin was also used as a gum at one point, which might just be my new favorite fun fact. As one of the most anticipated fruits of summer, I hope you're enjoying it every chance you get. And next time you spot a cherry, whether you're out on a walk or at the store, I hope you take a second to say hello and maybe contemplate if your current situation seems like it could be improved with bagpipes. That's all I've got for you this week, but we'll be back next week with some new plant facts to dig into. See you then! Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Friend of Friend Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.